We're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for taking some time to be on the call with us today. My name is Austin Sauerbrei. I'm the Executive Director of Statewide Organizing for Community Empowerment. We are a 50-year-old organization that since 1972, we've been dedicated to building community leaders and having strong communities that are engaged and can actually affect change for the issues that are critical and the issues that impact our communities. So having folks in cities and municipalities and counties coming together to actually affect change in their own communities. So we are so excited for everyone to be on the call tonight. And what brings us here tonight is this new third grade retention law, which if you're on this call, you've undoubtedly heard about it in some way, shape, or form. And there's been a lot of information circulating around this law. What we do know is overwhelmingly parents, teachers, and school administrators do not think this law is an effective way to support our students. And so tonight, what we're here today for is to actually hear directly from the folks on the ground, directly from our educators throughout Tennessee, hearing from them what's in the law, why it matters, who it will impact, and also what we can do about it. So tonight, we have an amazing group of teachers from across the state that are going to be sharing this information. We have Courtney Fugate from Hamilton County, Jennifer Owen from Knox County, Jonathan Enix from Putnam County, Liv Cook from McMinn County, and Kendra Young from Hamilton County. So throughout the evening, we're going to be on for about 45 to 50 minutes. So we're going to have a time to unpack what's in the law. We're going to hear about who it impacts. We're going to talk a little bit about what is actually in the proposed test and what our third graders are actually dealing with. And then we're going to talk some next steps and action items. And on the call tonight, we've had folks from over 25 counties register for this call. We have teachers, we have parents, school administrators, and elected officials. And we want to thank each of y'all for joining and actually taking time to hear from teachers about this issue. So before we get started, a little bit of Zoom etiquette. We have maxed out with registration on the Zoom. So if anyone has friends or family members or people they know that want to log on, please have them go to SOCM's Facebook page, and we have the Facebook Live going, and I think someone can put that in the chat, that link for y'all. But we're going to ask y'all to remain on mute. Aside from our presenters, we do have some folks that are going to be moderating that as well, but please remain on mute. That said, we do want the chat box to be active. So if you have thoughts or questions as our folks are presenting, please put them in the chat. We have about 10 minutes at the end for some Q&A. So please post those in the chat, and we'll try to take as many of those questions at the end as we can. And aside from that, I think we're ready to begin. So I'm going to hand it over to frame again why we're here and what brought this group together. I'm going to turn it over to Courtney.
Hi, I'm Courtney. I'm a teacher and a mom of a third grader in Hamilton County. About 2 months ago, I started a petition to amend the third grade retention law because I realized that there weren't many people who even knew that the law existed. The reason it's so important to me is my third grade son, Brett. He is an excellent reader, but he is not an excellent test taker. His ADHD and, just being an 8-year-old boy, make it pretty difficult for him to sit silently in the same spot for over an hour and bubble in answers on a test. Excuse me, I'm sorry. I know we had to do the same thing in school. I did anyway, but promotion to the next grade didn't hinge on my performance on that test. And kids in school today, they take practice tests for the TCAP 3 times a year. That's a lot of testing for an 8 to 9-year-old child, especially considering that this is their first year to take TCAP, their first year getting real grades, and their first normal year of school since COVID sent them home in kindergarten. Brett's first quarter benchmark scores in ELA predict that he'll score a 2+ on the ELA TCAP. That would land him in the approaching grade level category. Only 2 correct answers from proficient. That would mean that he would have to attend summer school and pass the ELA test or repeat third grade, and that would absolutely devastate him. Based on the current data that we have, only about 30% of third graders across the state would be promoted to fourth grade. I cannot even begin to imagine the implications that would have on our students, parents, educators, and just the state of education in general. We have to let lawmakers know that this is not the way to go about this. So anyway, thank you guys for joining us this evening. We hope to work together to influence the state to reconsider their policy and give local districts more control in student retention decisions. Jennifer?
Thank you. I'm going to go pretty quickly through what is in the law and a brief summary of that, as well as what was in the law before. I'm Jennifer Owen. I'm a school board member in Knox County. I'm just speaking as an individual tonight. So Tennessee's former retention law said that third graders could only be promoted if they showed a basic understanding of curriculum and ability to perform skills required in the subject of reading. If they did not meet that requirement, they could still move on by participating in an intervention, even if that intervention made no difference. There was nothing to prove that it did or didn't. The law did not cause significantly higher numbers of third graders to be retained like the new law will. And actually more students were retained in first and second grade than in third grade during the time that that data was kept. The Department of Ed stopped publishing retention data in 2016-17, so we don't have anything current. The new law, the Learning Loss Remediation and Student Acceleration Act, was part of the General Assembly's 2021 Extraordinary Session on Education in response to COVID-19. During that time, bills didn't go through the normal session, a 2-year time period. So rather than deliberating on a bill for anywhere from 3 months to a year, bills were amended and adopted in 3 days. The House sponsor of the bill was William Lambert, and only 2 House members opposed the final bill, John Ray Clemens and Gloria Johnson. The Senate version of the bill was sponsored by Jack Johnson, and online there's not a record of all of the Senate votes. We do have the Senate Finance, Ways and Means Committee vote online, and that only shows Senator Jeff Yarbrough as the opposing vote. So here is a summary of what the law says. Beginning with 2022-23, this school year, a student in third grade shall not be promoted to fourth grade unless the student's English language arts score on the TCAP test shows performance rated as on track or mastered. So retention hinges only on the English language arts portion of the TCAP test and nothing more. A student who is approaching proficiency, according to the TCAP test, may be promoted if some of these following conditions exist. If the student is an English language learner with less than 2 years of ELA instruction, if they were previously retained in any grade K through 3, if they're retested before the beginning of the next school year and score proficient, if they attend a learning loss bridge camp in the summer and have 90% attendance at that bridge camp and show adequate growth on a post-test at the end of the bridge camp, or if the student is assigned a tutor through the Accelerating Literacy and Learning Corps for the entirety of their fourth grade year. Now, if they are a student who scores below proficiency, they can do any of those first 3, but then they have to do both numbers 4 and 5. So they would have to attend a learning loss bridge camp in the summer with 90% attendance rate, show adequate growth on the post-test at the end of the bridge camp, and be assigned a tutor for the entirety of the fourth grade year. The rules on how that tutoring would work and the guidelines for that, as far as I understand, have not yet been developed by the Department of Ed, so we don't know what that would look like. So a student who is promoted to fourth grade must show adequate growth on the fourth grade English language arts portion of the TCAP test as determined by the Department of Education before they could be promoted to fifth grade, but a student shall not be retained in fourth grade more than once. Special education students, we should note, with IEPs that are specific would exempt them from this 3rd and 4th grade retention requirement. Based on those current rules, it's possible that a student could be retained in 3rd grade indefinitely and retained once in 4th grade. So in 2018-19, 35.5% of students across the state in grades 3 through 5 were considered on track or having mastered based on their TCAP scores. So in some counties, it's closer to 30%. In some counties, it's closer to 40%. So that means that statewide, only 35.5% of our students are slated to move on to 4th grade next year. There is a comptroller's recap of the law that's pretty extensive. If you want to really delve into it, it's there, and somewhere up near the top of the chat, I put the link to that. What we need to keep in mind is that there is no evidence showing that blanket retention is an effective strategy. I think we all know that already. And according to a clinical report from the American Academy of Pediatrics, the preponderance of evidence reveals that having a child repeat a grade is not an effective strategy to help a child with academic difficulties meet his or her maximum potential. And that's talking about a child with overall academic difficulties. This retention law is only specific to one little section of one standardized test. It's not even talking about general academic difficulties. It's talking about one teeny tiny section of one teeny tiny day. One of the authors of the clinical report, Dr. Laura McGuinn, expands on the question of whether a child should repeat a grade. And she says children won't outgrow learning and attention issues by repeating a grade. In fact, repeating a grade may contribute to long-term issues with low self-esteem, as well as emotional or social difficulties. I believe is Jonathan next?
Good evening, everybody. My name is Jonathan Enix. I'm a reading and math interventionist in Putnam County. And just like Jennifer was saying, the single test is not a good determiner for retention, if anything is. And that's what I want to talk about. And there are many, many reasons that it is not a good determiner for retention, but I want to focus in on two. So the first thing I want to talk about tonight is that the term proficiency itself is a misnomer. This is not a measure of achievement. This is literally a label that compares students. So I want to break down and talk through how that label is determined and what the outcomes will be there. And the second reason we want to talk about tonight is just that it's not good data. Existing Tennessee education policy says that students should be that retention should be determined based on various measures across time. We want good, rich data, not single data points. So let's plow ahead to that next screen there. And just looking at the law, just breaking it down there, it says that a student will not be promoted to the next grade level unless the student is determined to be proficient. So what does proficient mean? And it goes right on to say, based on the students achieving a performance level of on track or master, just as Jennifer talked about. So what do those levels mean? Let's take a look at the next screen there. And these are the achievement levels, the TN Ready score achievement levels. And you notice that there are 4 of them. Level 4, mastered, level 3, on track, level 2, approaching, and level 1, below. And those replace old terminology, but it's the same thing there. You just see that note at the end there. The old vocabulary from TCAP was level 4, advanced, level 3, proficient, level 2, basic, and level 1, below basic. It's the same thing. It's the same distribution, but now the terms are mastered, level 4, on track, level 3, approaching level 2, and below level 1. So I want to look at how, on that next screen there, what these scores mean and how they're determined. So a student receives what's called a raw score on their TCAP exam, but that's not what we get home. That's not the printout that comes, and that's not their scale score. It's not their performance or their what level they go into. The raw score, as you see there, is just the number of points they've earned, how many they got right or wrong. And then we take that number and basically find the mean, median, and mode of it and place it into a scale score, which is a comparison. And then we look at the distribution on that comparison and basically label them. And that's not totally arbitrary, but even the best statistician will tell you that there's some level of arbitrariness in those decisions on where those cutoffs are. And that's what it is. The concentration of students that are going to fall between level 2 and level 3. I mean, that's how the label is determined, based off of the highest concentration of students. And then we see how students have scored around that, basically a scatter plot of how students have scored around that. And what ends up happening, by definition, we have students who fall below and students who fall above. And what we're seeing historically on this test specifically, if we want to go ahead and look at that next screen there, is that it's sometimes 50%. This screen here, this data is the percentage here. If you look in that second column, the subject area, and the second row down, reading and language arts. So that's what one of the things we're talking about. This is 3rd to 8th, but this data is represented here. And we see that these percentages represent the number of, or the percentage of students who scored proficient, who were in levels 3 and 4. And we see that across the board here from 2011 to 2015 on TCAP, it was roughly 50%. So that would have meant at the time that 50% would have gone ahead and 50% would have been retained. Let's look at the next screen there with more recent data from the TN Ready from 2017 to 2021. So this is what we're talking about. This is the more specific test. And it's actually quite a bit more alarming, isn't it? We see reading and language in 2017 there, 33%, 34% of students scored in level 3 and level 4. That would mean that 65% of students would have been retained at that level. And that's true there across the board through 2021. So that's what's happening here. And another friend is going to talk about this in more detail later, but that next screen there, we've got to be aware that it disproportionately affects various communities, students with disabilities, people of color, people who are economically disadvantaged. This is a big deal, and it's affecting communities differently. I want to talk real quick. That next screen is a demo student. This is what you might see your student bring home, and it has their TCAP scores on it. And as you can see there, right across the top, it has the performance levels, just to say what they are: below, approaching, on track, and mastered. And then it'll give you a basic printout of where your student has fallen into those performance levels. If you flip over on the back of it, it'll look like this next slide here. It breaks those down by subject. And you can see, again, this is just a demo student, but they have various subjects here: Algebra 1, English 1, US History. And you'll notice that the label, that quartile label, approaching, on track, or mastered, the student has scored differently in each one, right? But the commonality through each of these, notice that under each of those subject areas, those blue and orange and yellow boxes, the blue box says your student demonstrated a strong understanding in these areas. And it lists things that according to that test, your student is already mastered, perhaps, or is already doing well with. And then that orange box says they're ready to move on to this. We have some, these are some things that needs improvement. And then the yellow box has some next steps and ways to target those specific skills. So, and that's helpful. The real point that I want to bring out of that is, why do we need that label? Why do we need that comparative label, 1, 2, 3, or 4? When this other data is great to see what a student's strengths or weaknesses might be and to be able to tackle that. All right, we want to move on. The second thing I want to talk about just briefly in response to the question, why is a single test not a good determiner of retention? Well, it's just not good data. Good data is instead gathered across time through various sources, right? We want teacher input, class grades, guardian family consultation, standardized tests, and they can have up to 30 per year. I'll talk about that in just a moment. That next slide there, again, in accordance, Tennessee's current education policy is good data. That first bullet there says that if considered for retention, students must be evaluated with multiple data points, including academic grades, standardized testing, attendance, other factors. So multiple data points. Schools must create individualized student plans to avoid retention, intervention services that target a student's specific skill deficits. All of these things are in the policy and that the law goes in direct opposition to. That next slide there is just a model. I'm going to skip through that. That research there, I was not going to read the entire thing to you anyway, but that's just an example of some research that says that intervention implemented as a part of the school year is more effective than retention is, just across the board. This tier here represents what Tennessee's model, again, already is for instruction, response to intervention. And if you look just on the far side of that model, that triangle, coming down the side of that, it says in white letters there, increasing support for students. What that means there, that big block at the top, think of it like a funnel. Tier 1 is all students. This is general education curriculum and classroom instruction, things that all schools are providing to all students. And throughout the course of that instruction, as if students are identified to be missing certain skills or have certain knowledge gaps, then Tier 2 services or intervention. Again, as we go down this list, we see an increasing support for students. So Tier 2 services that are targeted toward those specific skills are introduced. And Tier 3, those are increased more and more. There's a long process to here that I'm not going to dive into, but just suffice to say that this, again, is already Tennessee's policy. It's already what the structure is in how we're targeting skill deficits and instruction. And that last slide there that's pulled up, $4.5 billion has flooded in as a result of federal funding after the pandemic, and statewide that has been used consistently in things like intervention and remediation and building kids building on kids' skill deficits to get them caught up or to decrease that knowledge gap or whatever that is. I'm going to wrap up because I've probably already gone over a bit of time, but that last slide there, just to summarize everything, proficiency is just an arbitrary term, and it compares students to one another. And by definition, and how we saw from the data, 30 to 50% of students will be retained. And students are just more complicated than a test score. We can see their various strengths and weaknesses. It's enough to target those strengths and weaknesses and see what can do next steps. Our retention is rarely necessary. We can look at the data that we have and the various points and use all of these things together. And with the historic funds coming into education right now, this can already work without an increase in high stakes tests and high stress testing. As a matter of fact, it can probably only work without an increase in high stakes testing and high stress testing. So thank you all very much.
Hi, my name is Liv Cook. I'm a special education teacher in McMinn County, Tennessee. I'm also chair of McMinn County's chapter of SOCM. So what I'm going to be talking about is diving in a little bit deeper into what Jonathan was just talking about this is standardizing non-standard kids. So if we can go to the next slide there. So you saw this table earlier. I want to just put it out there more, front and center that this is harming already marginalized groups. Our kids that are going to be hurting the most from this law are going to be our socioeconomically disadvantaged students. It's going to be our Black students and our Hispanic students. Those are the three groups that are going to be already targeted and are going to be further more so under this law. And so while the law does exempt students with disabilities and English language learners, we have to think about what supports are really going to be in place for them too. Are we going to continue to adequately support them? Are we going to start seeing over referrals into special education? I know that as a special ed teacher, that's a huge concern of mine. Oh my goodness, we're going to retain this child. Well, let's try to go through this process of seeing if there's a disability, over referral, too many kids in SPED, and that gets into a whole nother wealth of problems. And that's compounded for kids who are already marginalized. Black students are already over referred to special education. So all we're doing is compounding issues for them. And when we think about what's going to happen to these kiddos after being retained, they're going to be less likely to graduate high school. They're going to be less likely to make as much money as their peers who were not retained. they're likely going to have more challenging behaviors because there's still not adequate supports in place for them. They're older than everybody in their grade. They might be victims of bullying or participating in bullying. So we're like treating a symptom, but not getting to the root of that individualized attention that that child needs. And when we think about the broader cost for our community, you can go to the next slide, that's okay. Think about our broader community. This is going to cost a lot of money for the taxpayer in our communities. In the 2019-2020 school year, average per pupil spending was $9,753. So if we retain 60% of our third graders, we're looking at that very large number there, $442 million that we're going to have to spend to educate our students. And that's not including the intervention services that they're going to need, that summer camp support, all of those extra things, because what we do know is that retention alone does not work. These students are going to continue needing that support. We can't just expect to retain them and that to fix everything. We can go to the next slide there. Another consideration is how is this going to impact our teachers? I teach at the grades 3 through 5 schools. So this has been a hot topic for us, trying to scrambling and figure out what this is going to look like for us next year. So teachers already on average spend about $1,000 to $1,500 of their own money on school supplies every year. So if we're not already truly supporting the needs of the classroom as is, we're going to add on that 60% of our grade getting held back. And then we're going to have to add on, okay, well, I've got to make all these extra materials, all these extra interventions and supports. So that burden is going to increase for teachers. Teachers, we love what we do. We love supporting our kids. But we're also taking on the load now under this law of the pressure of making sure they don't get retained. Special education teachers and interventionists are scrambling, trying to prevent these kids from getting retained or getting the right referrals in place. Teachers are the ones staying after school and doing the tutoring. We're the ones staying and doing summer camp over the summer. So we're already taking an exhausting, undervalued job and adding extra stress onto our teachers. And then also, this law also perpetuates the idea that we don't have good teachers and that our kids can't read. And that's just not true. That whole idea of proficiency this law is including our average C students. It's not showing the growth from where they were last year to where they are this year, because it's not taking into account the whole child. So it seems that we're devaluing the profession of teachers. We're pushing kids out of public sector and into that private sector where they may not get as much support and we're not going to get as much funding. So bottom line, we're hurting kids that are already hurting, and we've got to do better to support them.
All right, my name is Kendra Young. I was a longtime teacher here in Hamilton County. Taught science and English language arts for a total of about 17 years, but mostly science. And now I lead an organization called Unify Ed here in Hamilton County that focuses on public education advocacy. And so my portion of this is talking about what types of questions are on the third grade test and how those are even evaluated. So I know that several people have already mentioned, the test itself. Most people don't realize that the English language arts portion of the test for third grade is 4 sections long, okay? 4 different tests. And many of the questions on the third grade assessment, and this is true for other grades as well, do not test reading comprehension. We got to stop and talk for just a moment. What is reading comprehension? Well, that's to comprehend what you've read. Can you understand the piece of text that you just read? And so teachers have been complaining for a long time that judging our students and their performance and our teaching performance based on this test is unfair and ineffective because it doesn't always test what we think it tests. So take a moment and read through some of the questions in yellow on your screen and ask yourself, is that question testing reading comprehension? Can you understand what is being read? I'll give you just a moment to look over that before I point some of them out. Okay, just looking at the first one, happy is the opposite of glad, yes or no? Do you know what that's testing? Do you know what the word happy means? And do you know what the word glad means? And do you know what the word opposite means? But you're not comprehending what you've read. You have to know 3 vocabulary words there. So that's actually testing vocabulary. Stars are found in outer space. Well, that's actually testing science knowledge, right? That's on a reading that's on a reading test. It's not, stars are found in outer space. That was science content, not reading comprehension. Combing hair causes it to become tangled. Well, that's testing. Do you know what the word combing means? Do you know what the word tangled means? And for some students, they may not have ever experienced that. It's not testing reading comprehension. An author's job is to bake cakes. It's testing whether or not the student knows what an author is and what an author does. Okay, so absolutely, there's not one single question in that entire section that actually tests reading comprehension. I'm going to draw your attention over here to the second portion of this test. These are 4 questions here. In this section of the test, the student doesn't read anything except the answer choices. The teacher reads something aloud, and then the student has to answer based on what they heard the teacher read. Is that testing reading comprehension? I hope you said no. What that is testing is listening skills. Listening comprehension, that is not reading comprehension. However, these types of questions will base part of the score based on whether or not a child will determine whether or not a child gets to move on to the next grade level. If we can go ahead and have the next screen. We're going to do a sample 3rd grade question from the actual test. This is a released test item that students have actually taken before. There is a short reading part that is 151 words long. Average 3rd graders are expected to read 138 words per minute. So you will be given 70 seconds to read the passage. After that, Austin's going to throw up some questions. There are 4 different questions, and you will have just over 2 minutes to complete those. And again, this is based on the number of questions and what 3rd graders are asked to do. Austin, when I say go, I'm going to start my timer. And when you hear my timer go off, feel free to go ahead and go to the next slide and start.
Sorry to interrupt, but I don't think that everyone can see the questions, the poll.
Saw that in the text. Austin, do we know how to fix that? I know it's through a poll, so it should be. Oh, I bet it's only happening on the Zoom call.
Yeah, it's not going to show up on Facebook Live.
Oh, okay, that's what it is.
If there's folks that are on Zoom now that can't see it, it may be that you don't have the updated version of Zoom.
Okay, I'll just go over the questions right quick. So the first question asks, if you can pop that back up for me, Austin. I'll just mention them real quick because there were 4 questions and 2 of the 4 did not test reading comprehension. The first question asks, what lesson did Sam learn in the passage? That is definitely a reading comprehension question. The second question is, what is the meaning of the word glumly in paragraph 2? That's a vocabulary question. That is not a reading comprehension question. The third one asks, which sentence from the passage helps the reader understand the meaning of the word glumly? Again, that can kind of be an iffy. I would not consider that reading comprehension. It's asking, to identify a sentence that helps reading comprehension. So maybe, but I'm on the fence on that one. On the fourth one, it asks which word from the passage can be made into a new word by adding the suffix ful. Again, not a reading comprehension question. That is a vocabulary and a suffix question, parts of speech type question. So 2 of the 4, at least one of the 4, possibly 2 of the 4, are not even reading comprehension questions. So when you see these scores and you hear people say that our 3rd grade students can't read based on these test scores, please know that that is not a valid conclusion to draw based on these tests, because they do not test just simply reading comprehension. It's just not done. And I believe Liv is coming back in after that.
Oh, Kendra, I think we still had you on for the summer school portion.
Let's see. Oh, yes, we did. Okay, I'm sorry. I skipped ahead on the agenda on my eyes. I'm sorry about that. So what is the state recommending? So they get the test scores back and it says that the child is not where they need to be in order to promote to the next school level or to the next grade level. So right now, the state is basically proposing some type of after-school programming or summer school. So the child would have to stay late or attend summer school. So that presents all types of issues for families. Families may travel out of the state regularly over the summer. You may have families that have transportation issues. Even when schools are able to offer some type of transportation, it's usually a very limited bus route. And again, these are very young students that we're talking about. These are not middle and high school students that can be dropped off a couple of blocks from their house and capable of getting themselves home. These are 3rd graders. So you would have to have a very robust transportation system if the child and the family can even make the accommodations around work schedules and things like that to attend something that they have not, they weren't planning on, because they're not going to find this out for a few more months. So then that leads us to a lot of other really big questions that have yet to be answered from the state. So who's going to run these summer programs? Most of the monies that came have already been allocated. So who's paying for this? Who's going to run them? We are struggling to fill, I'm pretty sure this is true in other counties as well. We're struggling to find teachers for open teaching positions right now. Teachers have extremely large class sizes and additional duties. Who's going to stay late and work summers to get these done? Where are we going to get the funding for that? What happens to students who can't participate? Like I mentioned earlier, if they've got transportation or family, prior engagements that they just can't make this accommodation in their schedule. So where are the schools going to get all these additional 3rd grade teachers when we retain 50% of the student population? Where are we going to find additional 3rd grade classroom space? Because remember, we're retaining a lot of 4th graders too under this law. So you're going to need additional 3rd and 4th grade teachers and additional 3rd and 4th grade teacher classroom space. Where is that going to come from? And no one has those answers as of yet. Lot to consider right there and to unwrap just in that right there. And now I'm done.
So we've talked a lot about what our kids don't need. We don't need another standardized test. We don't need, to have this single data point that changes the trajectory of their lives. So I want to talk a little bit about what they do need. What can we ask of our legislators, administrators, school, all these people? What can we ask for? they need more individualized support for our students. So Jonathan talked a little bit about that tier process. You know, what can we do to support our interventionists, making sure those tiered support small groups are staying small, supporting children's academics and behavior, and supporting the whole child in an individual way, not a standardized one-size-fits-all way. We need to make sure that we have adequate funding for support staff. We need assistants in the classroom. We need interventionists. We need custodians and nurses and all these things in our schools to make them work well so that the whole child is serviced. We need smaller class sizes. You've heard it over and over again on this call. Teachers are overloaded. There's so many kids in a classroom, so many needs, and one adult. We've got to get smaller class sizes and smaller ratios. We also need to support our educators with fair pay, reasonable work requirements, respect, making sure that we are valuing them and the work that they do and how they love your kids well. We also need comprehensive social and emotional support for our students. The pandemic has traumatized us all. Imagine if we were going through the pandemic as a kindergartner, first grader. These kids were already living with traumas that many of us may not know about, or if you're working in the school system, you do know about. And the pandemic has made that even worse. And we're seeing it in our performance scores. We're seeing it in our classrooms. So we need to make sure that we are putting things in place to make sure that our children feel safe, nurtured, and wanted in our schools. And we can't do that if we're just failing them on one test and we're putting them in overloaded classrooms. So these are things that we can do and we can ask for to better support our kids in our schools.
Awesome. Thanks everyone for sharing. And we know that most of y'all have had very long days already working in the classroom. And so appreciate y'all taking time to unpack this for us. So we do actually have a few minutes for any questions from folks who are participating. And so we would ask if you have questions in the chat, we can look through those. Or if you do want to ask a question verbally, if you could just use the raise hand function. Are there folks that have any questions? Are there any questions from the chat? Well, I have one and this maybe bleeds a little bit into where we're going to talk about in the end, some next steps and action items. But for Jennifer in particular, as a school board member, how do you see school boards being able to handle this issue or act on this issue?
There are some things that school boards are doing now. Several school boards have adopted resolutions to present to legislators, asking them to amend the law and allow retention to be based on school district information, that classroom information that we all have on the broader academic abilities of students, and to also give supports that are needed. So one thing that we could do is contact our school board members to find out whether they have already adopted a resolution or if they are planning to adopt a resolution.
Excellent. Thanks, Jennifer. I see a few more questions in the chat. So how can I help as a community member? We are going to cover that in just one moment. But another question that came in, is there a process for asking for a delay until the problems are worked out? Does anyone here have an answer to that?
I can give a partial answer to that. The Department of Education is required to create rules for to appeal, but that's as far as it goes. So a parent could appeal the decision, but a process to delay it is not something that I know about.
Right. Any other questions? And you're about the law or the impact on students. Okay, I see one from Tony Clifford here. If this is going to go through, are they going to be providing more resources for children who don't qualify for an IEP due to not falling within the threshold. Any answers for that?
I don't know if I have an answer, but I know that that's also a concern of mine, is what does the special ed referral process going to look like now? Because they also put in that law suspected disability without really any guidance on what suspected disability looks like. And as a special education teacher, I'm also obligated to not predetermine what a child can do or predetermine what services they can offer. I do it based on a holistic data. So I'm also interested to see what their answers are. And I think the only way forward to get good student success is to make sure that we're supporting them well in that tiered intervention process. If we can invest in that, in RTI A plus B is what we're calling that, then hopefully we can see more success, but we've got to get the state on board with that as well.
So we also have a question coming in. So who is responsible for communicating about this law with parents who don't know anything about it? Is it the teacher, the district level officials, or the state?
I don't know that anyone is truly responsible, like has that job. But that is the reason that I started the petition. It's the reason that I've done interviews, because nobody is communicating anything. I mean, this law was passed in a summer session in 2021. And I read an article about it in September of this year. So I had no idea. And I have a third grader. I spoke to third grade teachers who had no idea when the school year started that this was a law. So I think it's anyone who knows about it. I think it's all of our responsibility to make sure that others know.
Excellent. And I will also say, from work we've done, I know that oftentimes even school administrators don't have the information from the state that they need to pass along. So I think there's multiple levels of information that's missing. All right, other questions from the chat. Mentioned a similar issue in Ohio. This is good from C. Don Jones, says the Maryville, for those in the Maryville area, Maryville City Schools published a brochure for parents. Any other questions from folks? All right. Well, we want to talk a little bit, actually answer some of those early questions about, well, what is it that we can do as a community to help with this issue? So I'm going to share my screen again real quick. And we have some clear next steps for every single person on this call, something that you can do. So we have 3 actions that anyone can take right now. There's more to do, but these are 3 actions that anyone can take. The first one is to send an email to your state representative. We have an action link. Many of you that are on the call have already filled it out. But if you go to bit.ly/morethanatest, there's a link with information about the law and a form where you can type in your address, and it'll automatically bring up the email addresses for your state representatives, and you can send them an email from there. Also, if you want to find the email address of your legislators, your representatives online, you can send them a personal email as well. But at least go to the link, take action, let your representatives know that this is on your radar, that you're concerned about it. The second is share that link on social media. As other folks have talked about, it's our collective responsibility to share this information with each other. There are so many folks that don't know about the law or have heard something about it and don't have information about what they should be doing. So share the information. We're trying to use the hashtag #MoreThanATest to help spread the word. And then finally, and I think this is the most important one, we're going to be having a meeting on November 17th via Zoom that is going to bring folks together from across the state to talk about what next steps you can do in your community. And the hope coming out of that conversation is that we want folks in your own local community, wherever it is that you live, to get together with other people, other parents, other teachers that are concerned, and do one of three things. Number one, either set up an in-person meeting with your state representative to share your concern and hear what their perspective is on the issue, and to ask them to amend the law during the legislative session in February. So setting an in-person meeting with a state representative. Second option is getting together with some of your friends in your community and going to your school board meeting and asking your school board whether they have signed a resolution to the state legislature. And if they haven't, asking them if they would please do that. By and large, most school boards are also concerned about this issue, but they need you as parents and teachers to ask them to take action. They need your support. And then the third is many of our folks have hosted parent-teacher community meetings for folks similar to what we're doing on this Zoom call, for folks to get together and talk about this issue and inform each other. So our hope on this November 17th call, we're going to break people out. We're going to have some framing, break people out into groups based on your geography, where you're located. And then you're going to have a chance to get together with other people in your city or your county to make a plan of how you're going to take action at a local level. So the link is right there if you want to register for that. We'll also be sending this in a follow-up email. So those are three easy actions. What we do know is that change will not happen if we do not work with each other at a local level, talk to our school board members, talk to our state representatives. And it's vitally important that we work together on this. The last thing I'll mention is we are looking at during the legislative session, which is where there is an opportunity to make a change with this law. There is an opportunity to either amend it or repeal it in the spring legislative session. And so we're going to be working on actually doing a day where we bring community members to Nashville to talk in person with state representatives for a lobby day. And so we'll be sharing more information about that as well. But those are three action items you can take in your community. And as Jennifer mentioned as well, Jennifer already talked about the importance of attending school board meetings. And Jennifer, I want to toss it back to you. Is there anything else on that front that you wanted to add?
I dropped a link in the chat to a list of school board members in our state. So they are arranged by county. If you are unsure who your school board members are, I wouldn't use that to contact all the school board members in the state. That's not going to be effective. But do use that to find your school board members and contact the school board members in your area to find out what they have done and encourage them to adopt a resolution.